Hello everyone, I am the narrator, and I'm here to guide you through a journey into the unknown today. I know many of you use this video to unwind and fall asleep, so before we dive in, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, I'd love to know, where are you from and what time are you watching this? Now, get comfortable, let your mind wander, and allow yourself to relax. This is going to be an adventure like no other. Let's begin. I'd been at Black Ridge Tower for 5 seasons. The Forest Service rotated most lookouts every 2 or 3, but I'd requested to stay. Something about the isolation settled me after Diane left. My tower sat on the northeast ridge with clear sight lines to Sawmill Peak, Eagle Cliff, and the western drainage. From late May through September, the tower became my world. 400 square feet of weathered cedar and glass perched 120 feet above the pines. That morning started like the others. I logged the temperature at 6:15, 42 with light ground fog in the valleys, and made coffee on the single propane burner. The forecast called for afternoon thunderheads, building from the southwest. Nothing concerning yet, but worth monitoring. I cleaned the glass with vinegar water, working systematically around the observation deck. Fingerprints and dust created false reflections, and in fire season, mistakes cost acreage. When the windows dried, I uncapped the Osborne firefinder centered in the room and checked its calibration against known landmarks. The brass pointer moved smoothly as I rotated the sighting mechanism, confirming alignment with Jackson Ridge to the east. At 8:45, I started my first scheduled sweep with the 10-power binoculars, west to east, quadrant by quadrant. I developed a rhythm over the years, 30 seconds on each section, small adjustments to catch different angles, then shifting 15. The movement caught my attention during my third sweep. A dark figure stood near the edge of Eagle Cliff, roughly 4 miles southwest of my position. I steadied the binoculars against the window frame and adjusted the focus wheel. Male, medium build, wearing what looked like a dark jacket, probably a hiker, but standing too close to the edge for comfort. I watched for 2 minutes. He didn't move like someone taking photos or enjoying the view. His posture seemed rigid, face directed down toward the 800 feet drop to the valley floor. I reached for the radio, keeping the binoculars trained on him with my free hand. "Dave, this is Tom at Black Ridge. You copy?" The radio crackled with a light static. "Morning, Tom. Dave. Here. What's up?" His voice sounded clear, despite the 4 miles between our towers. "I've got someone on Eagle Cliff, west face, about 20 yards from the lightning-scarred pine, standing right at the edge. Can you confirm visual?" I waited, watching as the figure raised both arms outward, like a climber preparing to dive into water. "Negative." "Tom, I don't have a visual on anyone at the cliff." Dave's response came after nearly 40 seconds of silence. "You sure? Dark jacket standing right at the drop-off should be visible from your southeast window." "I'm looking right at it. There's nobody there." I adjusted my position, double-checking the landmarks. The figure remained unmistakable against the granite backdrop. "Dave, he's still there?" He spread his arms out. "I think he might." The words caught as the figure leaned forward, weight shifting past the point of recovery. "He's jumping." He just went over. The radio stayed silent for several seconds. I tracked the falling form until it disappeared into the tree canopy below. "Dave, did you copy?" "Someone just jumped from Eagle Cliff right now at 9:12. "Tom," Dave's voice returned, oddly measured. "I've been watching that area. There's nobody there. No jumper." I set the binoculars down and picked up the logbook, writing the exact time and coordinates. My hand left sweat marks on the page. "I'm reporting this to headquarters and heading out there," I said, pressing the talk button harder than necessary. "Maybe you need some rest," Dave replied. "5th season's a long stretch in isolation." I didn't respond, switching channels to reach the district office. Marlene picked up on the second hail. "Black Ridge Station." Go ahead. This is Walker at Black Ridge Tower. I need to report a possible suicide jumper at Eagle Cliff, West. Witnessed through binoculars at 9:12 this morning. I recited the coordinates from the firefinder reading and described what I'd seen. Marlene asked if I had photographic confirmation, which I didn't. Standard procedure was to maintain position and continue observation while rangers investigated. But Eagle Cliff was a 4-hour hike for anyone coming from the district office. I'm going to check it myself, I told her. I can reach the base in under 2 hours. Negative, Walker. Protocol is clear. Maintain your post. There could be a survivor, I said, but we both knew the likelihood after an 800 feet fall was effectively zero. Fine. Log your departure and expected return. Take emergency equipment and maintain radio contact. Be advised, we have thunderstorms expected by mid-afternoon. I packed methodically despite the urgency. 2 L of water, emergency kit, map, compass, rain shell, headlamp, extra batteries for the handheld radio, protein bars. The weight came to 18 pounds with the first aid kit. I locked the tower and headed down the access trail at 9:42. The forest felt different on the ground. What looked like gentle slopes from above became steep traverses around fallen logs and boulder fields. I maintained a steady pace, stopping only to check my bearing and mark my route on the topo map. Dark clouds had gathered by the time I reached the drainage below Eagle Cliff. The first fat raindrops hit my shoulders as I worked through the dense understory, looking for any sign of disturbance in the brush or tree canopy where a body might have fallen. The rain intensified to a downpour within minutes. Water sheeted off the cliff face above, turning the forest floor into saturated sponge. I gridded the area systematically, working outward from where I calculated the impact point should be. Nothing. No broken branches. No disturbed ground. No clothing fragments. No body. Lightning cracked nearby, close enough that I smelled ozone. I continued searching for another 40 minutes before accepting. I needed to head back. The storm had obliterated any tracks or evidence that might have existed. If someone had fallen here, there should be some trace. The absence felt more disturbing than finding a body would have been. I radioed my findings to headquarters, voice nearly drowned by the hammering rain on my jacket hood. No evidence of impact or victim located. Heavy rain has compromised the search area. Copy that. Return to your station immediately. Storms intensifying across your route. The hike back took nearly 3 hours against the weather. I reached the tower after dark, soaked despite the rain gear. After changing into dry clothes, I made detailed notes in the logbook, sketching the exact position where I'd seen the figure and mapping my search grid below the cliff. Around midnight, the storm finally passed. I stepped onto the observation deck, letting the clean-washed air clear my head. Through the darkness, I could just make out the lights of Dave's tower to the southwest. They glowed steadily, unlike the jumpiness in his voice when he denied seeing what I'd witnessed. I'd known Dave for 3 seasons. He'd always been reliable, straightforward, but today, something in his tone didn't match the words. I flipped back through the logbook, checking entries from the past week, looking for anything unusual in our communications. Nothing stood out, except perhaps a growing brevity in his check-ins. The night stretched out around me, vast and quiet after the storm. I kept returning to one unsettling thought. Dave had lied to me. I just couldn't figure out why. Marlene Haskell pulled up to the base of my tower at 8:45 the next morning. Her Forest Service truck left deep tire tracks in the mud from yesterday's storm. I watched her gather a leather portfolio and digital camera before climbing the stairs. Her boots made hollow sounds on the wooden treads. I'd spent the night documenting everything in the logbook. Times, coordinates, weather conditions, visibility factors. The coffee pot was full when she knocked. "Morning, Walker." She stepped inside, removing her green service cap. Gray streaked her dark hair at the temples. "Quite a report you filed. I poured her coffee in the spare mug. Everything's in the log. I've marked the sight lines and calculated the drop trajectory. She nodded, accepting the coffee with her left hand while placing her portfolio on the table with her right. I need to get your statement first, then we'll review your documentation. For the next hour, Marlene recorded my account on a small digital recorder. She interrupted only for clarification on timestamps and visual details. The process felt familiar. I'd filed incident reports before, though usually for lightning strikes or smoke columns, never a jumper. The visibility was excellent, I explained, pointing to my weather log, ceiling at 12,000 feet, humidity at 28%. I had clear sight lines to Eagle Cliff with 10 power binoculars. Marlene made a note. And you're absolutely certain about what you saw? Yes. Male figure, dark jacket, medium build, stood at the edge for approximately 2 minutes before raising his arms and jumping. Her pen paused. You know as well as I do that isolation can affect perception. 5 consecutive seasons is a long stretch. I know what I saw. The words came out flatter than I intended. She didn't push, but turned to a fresh page. What about Dave's response? You reported he claimed to see nothing. Correct. He had clear sight. Lines from Sawmill Tower. He should have been able to confirm. Marlene took a slow sip of coffee. Did Dave give any indication why he might not have seen this person? I considered my words carefully. No, but his tone was off. Dave's usually quick to respond, thorough. Yesterday, he sounded hesitant. She made another note, then stood to examine my Osborne firefinder. Her fingers traced the brass edge, professional habit-checking equipment. We'll send a team to search the base again, she said, though her expression suggested protocol rather than conviction. The storm might have obscured evidence. I'll also speak with Wilson at Sawmill before leaving. She photographed my logbook entries and the hand-drawn map I'd created showing the cliff face in the area I'd searched. The camera shutter clicked 8 times. Maintain your regular duties. Walker radio and anything unusual. She paused at the door. And get some rest. You look stretched thin after her truck disappeared down the access road. I tried reaching Dave again. Sawmill Tower. This is Black Ridge. Come in, Dave. His response came after the 3rd attempt. Voice clipped. Sawmill here. Marlene's heading your way. Just giving you a heads up. Copy that. His voice sounded flat. None of the usual banter. Everything okay over there? Fine. Just busy. Sawmill out. The transmission ended abruptly. I marked the time in the log. 10:17. With a note about the unusual brevity. At 2:35, Marlene radioed with an update. The search team had found nothing at the cliff base. No evidence of disturbance in the underbrush. No personal effects. No body. She'd spoken with Dave, who maintained he'd seen nothing unusual that morning. We'll file the report, she concluded. Keep your eyes open, but focus on your primary duties. Fire danger's increasing with this dry spell. I acknowledged and returned to my scheduled observations. The afternoon passed slowly. I logged 3 tourist campfires in permitted areas and a distant smoke column that dissipated after 20 minutes. Likely a controlled burn from the Henderson property on the eastern boundary. The radio crackled at 2,241, startling me from a half-sleep in the observation chair. Dave's voice came through, barely above a whisper. Tom, you still up? I reached for the handset. I'm here. What's going on? I need to tell you something. His voice had an unfamiliar tightness about yesterday. I reached for my logbook and pen. I'm listening. I did see him. The words hung in the static. The man at the cliff. I lied. My grip tightened on the radio. Why? Not because I thought you were wrong. Because I was scared. His breathing sounded uneven through the transmission. There was something wrong about him, Tom. The way he stood there, like he wasn't really there, but was more there than anything else. If that makes any sense. It didn't, but I kept silent, letting him continue. And he looked right at my tower before he jumped, turned his head, and looked directly at me like he knew I was watching. A pause, like he wanted me to see. I wrote his exact words in the logbook. "Did you tell Marlene this?" "No." His response was immediate. "She wouldn't understand. She'd think He stopped abruptly. "Think you're what?" "Dave. Got to go. Someone's here." "Dave? Who's there?" "Dave." The transmission ended. I tried calling back 4 times with no response. At the 5th attempt, he answered, voice oddly composed. "Sawmill Tower." "Dave, who was there?" "You cut out." "Sorry about that. Thought I heard something outside." False alarm. His tone had completely changed. Casual, almost rehearsed. "Look, forget what I said earlier. Been a long couple of days. You said you saw the jumper, that he looked at your tower. Did I? Must be more tired than I thought. Let's talk tomorrow." The transmission ended before I could respond. I stared at the radio, then made detailed notes of the entire exchange, including the timestamps and the abrupt shift in his demeanor. I pulled out the topographic maps from the storage drawer and spread them across the table. With a pencil, I marked our tower locations, Eagle Cliff, and the search area I'd covered yesterday. The geography formed a rough triangle, with both towers having clear sight lines to the cliff, in red. I marked the position where I'd seen the figure jump. Then I plotted the trajectory based on an 800 feet free fall with standard wind resistance. The impact zone matched where I'd searched, yet we'd found nothing. I'd been in these forests for 5 seasons. Old-timers at the ranger station had stories. Hikers who disappeared without trace. Unexplained lights and remote valleys. Distress calls that couldn't be triangulated. I'd dismissed them as the usual folklore that accumulates in isolated places. Now, those stories resurfaced in my mind, taking on weight. At midnight, I stepped onto the observation deck with binoculars. The quarter moon provided enough light to make out Dave's tower on Sawmill Peak. Its windows should have glowed with the kerosene lamp. He kept burning until his usual 2 a.m. bed check. Tonight, his tower stood dark against the sky for hours earlier than normal. I made one last radio call, keeping my voice neutral. Sawmill, this is Black Ridge. Radio check. Over. Nothing came back but soft static. I marked it in the log and continued watching his tower until my eyes burned with fatigue. The darkness there remained absolute. Dave's radio stayed silent for most of the next 3 days. I logged each attempted contact in the book. Morning check at 7:15, midday at noon, evening at 6:30. When he did respond, the transmissions lasted under 20 seconds. Gone were the weather observations he'd usually append. The casual mentions of deer sightings or passing hikers. Conditions normal, nothing to report. His voice sounded stretched thin, like a rubber band pulled to its limit. I marked the changes in my logbook, noting timestamp, duration, and specific wording. The pattern showed clear deviation from 5 years of established habits. On the 3rd day, I radioed headquarters after my evening sweep. "Marlene, this is Walker at Blackidge. Got a minute?" "Go ahead, Tom." Paper rustled in the background. "It's about Dave. His communication's been off since the incident. Minimal responses. Delays in acknowledging transmissions. Wanted to get it on record." A pause stretched before she answered. "He seemed fine when I visited. Bit tired, maybe." "When was that?" "Day before yesterday. Around 1100 hours. More paper shuffling. I'll note your concern. Planning a supply run to both towers next week. Anyway, appreciate it." After signing off, I prepared for the night shift. The summer heat had broken with the last storm, leaving the air cool enough to require a flannel over my t-shirt. I heated a can of beef stew on the propane burner, ate at the small desk while updating weather data, then washed the dishes with water from the rain barrel. The night routine never varied. Final exterior scan with binoculars. Temperature logging. Equipment check. Windows secured by 2,300 hours. I'd powered down to the small reading lamp and nighttime radio. Sleep came in shallow drifts. Something felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. At 217, I woke suddenly, unsure what had pulled me from sleep. The air in the tower felt unusually still. A faint orange glow caught my peripheral vision. I rose from the bunk and moved to the southeast window, where a distant light flickered against the darkness. I reached for the binoculars hanging by the door and steadied them against the window frame. The focus knob needed 3 full turns before the image clarified. A bonfire burned in a clearing approximately 2 miles southeast of my position, flames reaching maybe 4 feet high. 2 figures stood beside it, black silhouettes against the orange light. I scanned the area, checking for vehicles or tents. Nothing visible. No access road led to that clearing, just dense forest and undergrowth. Campers sometimes hiked in, but rarely that deep, and almost never at night. The figures moved deliberately around the fire, maintaining equal distance from each other. Not the random movements of people warming themselves or cooking, but measured steps like a rehearsed pattern. One figure stopped abruptly and turned not toward the fire, but directly toward my tower. Their arm raised in a slow, deliberate motion. A wave. My hand tightened on the binoculars. The distance was too great to discern facial features, but the gesture was unmistakably directed at me. They knew they were being watched. I set the binoculars on the desk and reached for the radio. Sawmill Tower. This is Black Ridge. Dave, you awake? Over. Static hissed for 52 seconds. I counted each one before his voice came through, barely above a whisper. I'm here. There's a bonfire in the southeastern clearing, about 2 miles from my position. 2 individuals. One of them just waved at my tower. Can you confirm visual? The silence stretched long enough that I thought he might have switched off. When his voice finally came, it carried a tremor I'd never heard before. Don't look at them. Each word emerged distinct, measured. Pretend you don't see them. Dave, what's going? The transmission cut. I tried 3 more times with no response. The logical part of my brain cataloged explanations. Illegal campers, teens trespassing, maybe researchers who hadn't filed proper permits. Nothing sinister, just people where they shouldn't be. But Dave's warning lingered. I returned to the window with the binoculars. The figures now moved in perfect synchronization, circling the fire at the same pace, keeping opposite positions. The flames suddenly flared higher, nearly doubling in height, without any visible fuel being added. The surge illuminated the clearing enough to see more detail. I adjusted the focus, trying to make out their faces where features should have been. Eyes, nose, mouth. The firelight revealed only smooth, indistinct surfaces like mannequins, or people wearing flesh-cold masks. The impression lasted only seconds before the flames receded to their previous height, casting the figures back into silhouette. I stepped away from the window, binoculars still clutched in my left hand. My right had already picked up a pencil, automaticity taking over as I began logging what I'd seen. The familiar process of documentation steadied my breathing. I drew a map showing the clearing's position relative to known landmarks, noting exact times and descriptions of movements. At the bottom of the entry, I wrote, subjects appeared to lack distinct facial features when illuminated by fire surge. Possible explanation: distance distortion, smoke effects, or masks. I continued observing until 4:38, when the fire diminished to embers and the figures retreated into the tree. No further radio contact from Dave came despite 3 additional attempts. Dawn broke clear and cool at 5:52. I made coffee, logged the morning temperature at 47, and checked the day's forecast. Clear skies, light winds from the northwest, low fire danger. After the morning radio check to headquarters, still nothing from Dave. I packed a day bag with water, compass, map, first aid kit, and radio. The tower protocol required logging any departure. I wrote my intended route and estimated return time, then locked the door behind me. The forest felt different on the ground than it appeared from above. Pine needles cushioned my steps. As I followed a game trail southeast, the nearest official path lay half a mile west, but this route would cut 20 minutes off the journey. Shafts of morning lights penetrated the canopy, creating bright patches on the forest floor. After 40 minutes of hiking, I reached the creek that ran east of the clearing. The water level had dropped since the last storm, exposing smooth stones that provided easy crossing points. Chickies called overhead, their voices reassuringly normal. The clearing appeared without warning. One moment I pushed through dense undergrowth. The next, I stood at the edge of a perfect circle, approximately 60 feet in diameter. No trees grew within it, no shrubs or ferns, just bare earth that looked unnaturally level. At the center, a circle of ash marked where the fire had burned. I approached carefully, scanning for footprints or discarded items. Food wrappers, cigarette butts, the usual traces campers left behind. Nothing disturbed the ground except my own boot prints, pressing into the soft soil. The ash circle measured exactly 7 feet across. I crouched beside it and removed a glove. The center still held warmth when I hovered my palm an inch above it. I touched a fingertip to the ash, finding it soft and fine-grained, without the chunks of partially burned wood, typical of campfires. Around the circle's perimeter, the ground showed no sign that anyone had stood there. No depressions from weight, no scuff marks, no transfer of ash beyond the perfect boundary. I photographed the site with a small digital camera I carried for official documentation, then made rough measurements using my boot length as reference. The clearing itself formed an almost mathematically perfect circle, as though drawn with a compass. Before leaving, I collected a small sample of ash in a plastic evidence bag, labeling it with location and time. The morning breeze picked up as I sealed the bag, carrying away some of the finer ash particles. They didn't behave like normal ash, rising in a perfectly straight column before dispersing rather than scattering in the direction of the wind. On the hike back, I found myself checking over my shoulder more often than necessary. The forest had resumed its normal sounds, birds calling, branches creaking, the distant rush of the creek. Yet something felt off about the spacing of trees, as though they'd been arranged rather than grown naturally. I reached the tower at 11:23, exactly 4 minutes ahead of my estimated return time. After unlocking the door, I placed the ash sample on the desk and made detailed notes of everything I'd observed. The radio crackled as I finished the entry. Black Ridge, this is Marlene. Scheduled check-in. I picked up the handset. Black Ridge, here all normal. I considered mentioning the bonfire in my investigation, but hesitated. Without evidence beyond a circle of ash in my own observations, the report would sound like the beginning of another isolated lookout story. Those never ended with continued employment. Any contact from Wilson today? Marlene asked. Negative. Still not responding to scheduled checks. I've moved up my supply run. I'll be at his tower tomorrow morning. Copy that. I'll maintain regular attempts to contact. After signing off, I examined the ash sample under the small field microscope kept for identifying plant specimens. The particles appeared uniform in size and composition, unlike any campfire residue I'd seen before. No fragments of charcoal, no partially combusted material, just fine gray powder. I sealed the sample and logged it, then returned to my regular duties. The day passed with the familiar rhythm of weather readings, terrain scans, and documentation. No smoke columns appeared, no unusual movements in the forest below. When night fell, I found myself avoiding the southeast windows, focusing instead on routine tasks until exhaustion overtook weariness as I drifted towards sleep. The radio beside my bunk emitted a brief burst of static that shaped itself almost into words before fading back to silence. I returned to the tower after sunset, climbing the stairs with muscles stiff from sitting in the observation chair all day. The radio's message light blinked steadily in the dimness. 3 missed calls, all from headquarters, all within the past 2 hours. I hung my jacket on the peg beside the door and pressed the callback button. Marlene answered on the second tone. "Tom, where have you been?" Her voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. "Regular exterior patrol." I glanced at my logbook, where I had noted my departure time, documented in the daily log as required. "Dave's gone dark," she said, without preamble. "No response to scheduled check-ins since 0600 this morning." I looked toward Sawmill Peak through the west window. No lights visible in Dave's tower. The silhouette sat black against the deepening blue sky. "Could be equipment failure," I offered, though I didn't believe it. His recent behavior suggested something else entirely. That's what I thought initially. Papers shuffled on her end, but his backup radio should have kicked in automatically. "We've tried all channels." I pulled out my chair and sat, reaching for my pen. "When was his last transmission?" 23:42 last night. Standard evening report. Nothing unusual noted. She paused, except he signed off with "lock your door." Station supervisor thought it might be related to bear activity, but there's no alert in that zone. I wrote the exact time and the unusual signal phrase in my log. "What's the response plan?" "I'm heading to his tower tomorrow at first light. Rangers Johnson and Patel will accompany me." Her tone shifted toward official protocol. "I need you to maintain your post. Keep trying his frequency, hourly, and log any response." "Understood." I hesitated, then added, "There's something you should know about Dave's behavior recently." I detailed the changes I'd observed, his abbreviated responses, the midnight confession about seeing the cliff jumper, his warning about the bonfire figures. Marlene listened, without interruption, though I heard her pen scratching notes. "Did you document all this?" she asked when I finished. "Every word. It's in my log." "Good. We'll review it tomorrow. For now, maintain standard procedure. Hourly radio checks to Dave. Regular reports to headquarters." Her voice softened slightly. "And Tom, be thorough with your observations tonight." After signing off, I performed my evening routine with mechanical precision. Temperature reading 52 with falling pressure. Wind northeast at 12 miles per hour. Visibility 7 miles, and deteriorating as clouds built from the southwest. I marked each measurement in the log, the familiar process steadying my hands. The Weather Service had issued a severe thunderstorm warning for our region, effective from 2,200 hours through 600. I noted this in red pen at the bottom of the page, then prepared for a potentially long night. I filled the emergency lanterns, checked the backup radio batteries, and set water to boil for coffee. At 1900 hours exactly, I made my first call to Dave's Sawmill Tower. "This is Black Ridge. Radio check over." Nothing but soft static filled the channel. I repeated the call twice more before logging the attempt and result. No response. Clear transmission. The sky darkened rapidly as the storm approached. Lightning flickered along the western horizon, still too distant for thunder. I counted 27 flashes in 15 minutes. Unusual intensity for early season storms. The barometer dropped another 2 millibars in just over an hour. I continued the hourly calls through the evening. 2,000 hours, no response. 2,100, no response. The storm edged closer, occasional rumbles now accompanying the brighter flashes. I secured the exterior equipment and closed the storm shutters on the windward side, leaving only the leeward windows uncovered for observation. By 2,300 hours, rain pounded against the roof in rhythmic sheets. Wind gusts rocked the tower on its foundations. Nothing concerning, but enough to make the timbers creak. The radio produced more static than clear signal as atmospheric interference increased. I tried Dave's channel again at 23:15, not expecting a response. Sawmill Tower, Black Ridge calling. Dave, if you can hear this, acknowledge. Over. The burst of static that answered nearly made me drop the handset. Tom, is that Dave's voice broke through, fragmented, but unmistakable. I adjusted the frequency tuner, trying to clear the signal. Dave, I can barely hear you. What's your status? Coming from the trees. Tom? His words slurred together, either from poor transmission or something else. They've always been here watching us. I grabbed my notebook, writing his exact words as he spoke. Dave, are you injured? What's your location? He continued, as if he hadn't heard me. The man who jumped. He was trying to escape them. You can't. Static swallowed several words. Just pulls you back. Dave, I need you to focus. Are you at your tower? I kept my voice level despite the concern building in my chest. They show you things. His breathing came faster now, audible even through the interference. Things that happened before. Or maybe things that will happen. Time doesn't work right around them. Lightning struck close enough to illuminate the entire observation deck in harsh white light. The radio squealed with feedback, then went silent mid-word. Dave, do you copy? Nothing but dead air. I switched to the emergency channel to contact headquarters. The night dispatcher answered after the fourth attempt. Forest Service, emergency dispatch. This is Walker at Black Ridge Tower. I just had contact with Wilson at Sawmill. He sounds disoriented, possibly in distress, requesting immediate assistance. The dispatcher confirmed my information, the scratching of her pen audible through the transmission. Ranger teams are grounded until morning due to the storm system. Lightning strikes have been reported throughout the access routes. He needs help now, I insisted, an unfamiliar urgency pushing through my usual restraint. I understand, Walker, but we can't risk additional personnel in these conditions. First response team will deploy at 0500 hours, weather permitting. Her tone held genuine regret. Continue monitoring his frequency and report any further contact immediately. After signing off, I recorded the exchange in my logbook, along with the exact timestamp and duration of Dave's transmission. I played back his words in my mind, trying to extract meaning from the rambling. The man at the cliff was trying to escape them. Escape what? And who were they that supposedly watched from the trees? I considered possible explanations. Dave kept a bottle of whiskey in his tower. Rangers weren't supposed to drink on duty. But everyone knew about emergency stashes. Maybe he'd been drinking to calm his nerves and spiraled. Or perhaps isolation had finally cracked something in him. 5 seasons was unusually long for a lookout rotation, but Dave had been here for 3 himself. Neither explanation fully satisfied. Dave's voice hadn't sounded drunk. It had sounded afraid. And while isolation could wear on the mind, his deterioration had happened too rapidly, with too many specific fixations. The third possibility, that something genuinely wrong was happening at Sawmill Tower, seemed simultaneously the least and most likely. Thunder cracked directly overhead, rattling the windows in their frames. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. I checked the generator connections and fuel level, finding both nominal, 2348. Less than 7 hours until the rescue team would deploy. Between thunderclaps, a different sound caught my attention. 3 distinct knocks at the base of the tower door. My hand froze on the logbook page. No one should be out in this storm. No vehicle had approached. I would have seen headlights on the access road. I reached for the heavy flashlight I kept beside the desk, its machined aluminum body fitting my palm like a tactical baton. I moved to the stairs, listening. Another series of knocks, more insistent this time. Wind could cause branches to hit the structure, but not with that rhythm. Not with that deliberate spacing between sounds. Who's there? I called down the stairwell, my voice steady, despite the tension coiling at the base of my spine. No answer came except the howl of wind forcing its way through the seams around the door. I descended 5 steps, then stopped to listen again. Nothing but storm sounds now. I continued down, flashlight raised, until I reached the ground-level landing. The door remained closed, its deadbolt engaged as I'd left it. Through the small window, I could see only darkness and rain. I pressed my ear against the wood, hearing nothing unusual, then carefully slid the bolt back and pulled the door open to in. Wind immediately forced it wider, bringing a spray of cold rain. I braced my boot against the bottom edge and shined the light outward in a sweeping arc. The beam revealed only wet earth, battered undergrowth, and rain falling in diagonal sheets. No footprints in the mud, no vehicle tracks, no sign anyone had approached. I secured the door again, testing the lock twice, then climbed back upstairs. Water dripped from my sleeve onto the logbook as I recorded the incident. 2,353 heard knocking at base door. 3 distinct knocks, followed by 3 more, after approximately 20 seconds. Investigation revealed no evidence of human presence. Weather conditions severe, with wind gusts estimated at 3,035. Mnemoni, possible natural. Explanation, loose equipment, or debris. I couldn't convince myself of that explanation, but I wrote it anyway. The alternative documenting my growing suspicion that whatever affected Dave had followed me here would read like the beginning of a psychological evaluation. The rest of the night passed in a cycle of attempted radio contacts, weather observations, and careful listening. The storm peaked around 2:15 with lightning strikes close, enough to leave after images on my retinas. Each flash illuminated the forest in freeze-frame snapshots. Trees bent sideways in the wind, water sheeting off the roof edge. The access road transformed into a muddy river. Between each lightning burst, the darkness felt heavier, more complete. Twice I thought I saw movement at the tree-in, something more deliberate than wind-hipped branches. I kept the binoculars ready, but never managed to catch anything definitive in the brief illumination. The knocking didn't return. I transcribed Dave's exact words on a separate page, analyzing each fragment. They're coming from the trees. Who? Specific entities? Or metaphorical? They've always been here watching us, implies long-term presence unnoticed until recently. The man who jumped was trying to escape them. Connects cliff jumper to whatever Dave fears. They show you things. Things that happened before, or maybe things that will happen. Suggests hallucinations or visions. Time doesn't work right around them. Most concerning statement. Complete detachment from reality. I drew connections between these statements and Dave's previous behavior. His lie about not seeing the jumper, followed by his confession, his reaction to the bonfire figures, his increasingly erratic communication pattern. A picture emerged of someone experiencing escalating paranoia, centered on being watched by entities that somehow manipulated perception or reality itself. The storm began to subside around 4:30. Lightning still flickered occasionally to the east, but the thunder had faded to distant rumbles. Rain continued steadily, but without the previous intensity. I made one final attempt to reach Dave at 4:45, receiving nothing but static in return. Through the eastern window, the faintest lightening of the sky promised dawn within the hour. First response teams would deploy soon. I updated the logbook with current conditions. Temperature 48. Wind diminished to 8 miles per hour from the west. Precipitation continuing but moderate. Barometric pressure rising slowly. As I finished writing, the radio emitted a burst of static that almost, but not quite, shaped itself into words. I adjusted the frequency, trying to capture it again, but the channel remained silent afterward. I poured my 5th cup of coffee and carried it to the observation deck. The eastern horizon showed a thin line of lighter gray beneath the cloud cover. In that dim pre-dawn light, I could just make out the silhouette of Sawmill Tower against the sky. No light showed in its windows, No smoke rose from its chimney, despite the chill. The structure stood as a dark cutout against a gradually brightening background, revealing nothing about what waited inside. The storm blew itself out sometime before dawn. I woke at 5:15. To the sound of water dripping from the eaves, rather than pounding against the roof. Sunrise revealed a landscape transformed. Branches scattered across the clearing below. Rivulets of mud carving new channels down the access road. The sky washed clean to a pale blue. I performed a morning radio check at 6 on the dot. Sawmill Tower. This is Black Ridge. Radio check. Over nothing but a soft hiss of static. I logged the attempt, then switched channels to contact headquarters. Black Ridge to Forest Service dispatch. Morning check-in. The signal wavered, but held. A dispatcher I didn't recognize answered, her voice breaking intermittently. Reading you, Black Ridge. Rescue team deployment has been delayed. Multiple trees down across Sawmill Access Road. Estimate. Static swallowed several words. 4 hours minimum. I pressed the transmit button. Confirm 4-hour delay. Any contact from Wilson? Negative. No transmission from Sawmill since your report. I glanced westward where Dave's tower stood dark against the morning sky. 4 hours minimum, maybe 6 or 8 in reality, depending on the damage. Request permission to investigate Sawmill Tower, personally, I said. The pause stretched long enough that I thought we'd lost connection. Negative, Walker. Maintain your post. Rescue team will. More static. Standard protocol. Copy that, I responded, though my decision had already solidified. After signing off, I made a full entry in the logbook documenting weather conditions, communications, and the rescue delay. At the bottom, I wrote in block letters, emergency departure at 6:45, destination Sawmill Tower to check Wilson's welfare, estimated return, 1,400 hours. I packed methodically, first aid kit, water purification tablets, emergency blanket, 3 protein bars, extra radio battery, flashlight, pocket knife, compass, detailed topographic map. The backpack weighed 11 pounds when finished. I added my rain jacket despite the clear sky. Mountain weather changed without warning. Before leaving, I took one last look at my logbook entries from the past week. The pattern of Dave's deterioration stood out in stark relief when viewed. Chronologically, from normal communications to cryptic warnings to frightened rambling. Whatever had happened at Sawmill Tower hadn't been sudden. I locked the tower door at 6:45 exactly, testing the handle twice before descending the stairs. The forest had transformed overnight. Familiar trails now interrupted by fallen branches. Normally dry creek beds flowing with muddy runoff. The direct route to Sawmill would take me west-northwest for approximately 4 miles over varied terrain, crossing 2 ridge lines and a drainage basin. The first mile followed a maintenance trail wide enough for ATVs, though fallen debris now made vehicle access impossible. Pine needles lay plastered against the earth, flattened by rain and wind. My boots left clear impressions in the soft ground, the first human tracks since the storm. Something felt wrong about the forest. The usual morning chorus of birdsong was absent, replaced by a stillness that pressed against my ear. No chickens called from the undergrowth. No woodpeckers hammered at distant trunks. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the branches. I checked my watch at the first junction, 7:23. The fallen timber had slowed my pace more than expected. Here, the maintained trail ended, replaced by a game path that descended toward the drainage basin. Deer and elk had worn this route over decades, creating a natural corridor through the pines. The silence deepened as I moved downslope. Normally, these drainages bustled with activity, squirrels chattering, jays calling, insects humming. Today, I heard nothing but my own breathing and the occasional drip of water from saturated branches. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud against the forest floor. I crossed the swollen creek at 7:49, using a fallen pine as a makeshift bridge. The water ran fast beneath me, brown with sediment. On the opposite bank, the game trail continued upward toward the ridge, separating my territory from Dave's. Halfway up the slope, a flash of unnatural color caught my eye, something blue against the browns and greens of the forest floor. I altered course to investigate. A single hiking boot lay on its side, in the mud. Standard ISS-issued timberland. Forest Service approved, size 11, the same brand Dave wore. I crouched to examine it, noting the distinctive wear pattern on the outer heel, where Dave's slight limp affected his gait. The laces had been tied, not broken, or untied, as if the foot had somehow been pulled free while laced. 10 feet away, partially buried in wet leaves, I found his radio. The casing showed no damage, but the battery compartment hung open and empty. I pocketed it automatically. More evidence for whatever investigation would follow. I called his name, the sound swallowed by the dense trees. Dave. No response came, except the drip of water from leaves. I marked both locations on my map before continuing upward, eyes scanning for additional items. Nothing else appeared along the path. The climb to the Ardealine took another 35 minutes. From the crest, Sawmill Tower became visible approximately 1 mile west, a slender silhouette rising above the tree canopy. I descended the western slope at a controlled pace, testing each foothold on the rain-slicked ground. The silence persisted, creating a pressure against my eardrums that made me swallow repeatedly to equalize. Not even insects stirred in the underbrush. The base of Sawmill Tower came into view at 9:28. Unlike my own tower with its reinforced concrete foundation, Dave's stood on a stone base that had been constructed in the 1940s. The wooden steps leading upward showed signs of recent maintenance. New boards replacing rotted sections, fresh weather sealant on the railings. The door at the base stood open, 3 in, stopped by something wedged behind it. I approached cautiously, calling out once more, "Dave, it's Tom. You in there?" Only silence answered. I pushed the door open wider, finding a balled-up shirt, preventing it from closing completely. Inside, the ground floor storage area appeared untouched, equipment neatly arranged on shelves, winter supplies covered with tarps. The spiral staircase wound upward, 32 feet to the observation deck and living quarters. I climbed slowly, listening for movement above. Each step creaked slightly under my weight. Dave, Forest Service, identifying myself coming up. At the top landing, the main door to the living quarters stood fully open. The scene inside stopped me at the threshold. The normally orderly space had been transformed into chaos. The wooden chair lay on its side, one leg splintered at the joint. Dave's desk had been cleared with a single sweep. Papers, logbooks, and equipment scattered across the floor in a wide arc. Coffee stained the eastern wall in a spray pattern, originating from a shattered mug whose fragments glittered on the floorboards. Most disturbing was the logbook lying open on the floor, its final pages covered in frantic writing that abandoned all pretense of official documentation. The penmanship deteriorated from Dave's usually neat block letters to jagged scrolls that dug into the paper deeply enough to tear through in places. I photographed everything from the doorway before entering, careful to disturb as little as possible. The room carried a strange odor, not the expected smells of coffee and wood smoke, but something sharper, like ozone after lightning strikes. The wall above Dave's desk bore a crude drawing scratched directly into the wood paneling. 2 stick figures stood beside what appeared to be flames, while a third figure plummeted from a height. The image matched Dave's rambling description of the cliff jumper almost exactly. I documented the drawing from multiple angles, then moved systematically through the space. Dave's jacket hung on its peg by the door. His backpack rested against the wall beside his bunk, still containing his wallet, spare clothing, and personal items. The propane stove had been turned off properly, The water barrel remained 3/4 full. Nothing suggested planned departure. Quite the opposite. Every indication pointed to sudden flight or removal. The logbook provided the most compelling evidence. I crouched beside it, careful not to touch the pages directly as I read Dave's final entries. July 17th, 2342. Standard evening report completed. All normal except increased wind from SW temp dropping. Major storm system approaching. Battening down for the night. Will maintain hourly radio contact with Black Ridge as required. Below this professional entry, the writing changed dramatically. They're coming closer every night. I can see them watching from the trees. Tom doesn't understand yet. The jumper was trying to warn us. Further down, a single line written in shaky capitals. Time doesn't work right here. The final entry, barely legible. They're showing me how it ends. I can't let it happen again. I photographed each page, then gently closed the book and set it on the desk. The official search team would need to document everything properly. Outside the tower, I circled the base, looking for signs of Dave's departure. The ground, softened by rain, held clear impressions. A single set of boot prints led away from the tower. One boot and one sock-covered foot. Judging by the different impressions, the tracks headed due east, directly into the densest part of the forest, not following any established trail. The pattern suggested running rather than walking. Deep heel strikes, widely spaced steps, occasional slide marks where he'd lost footing on the wet ground, not the path someone would choose for rational travel. I followed the tracks 50 yards into the forest, before stopping to mark my map. The trail continued straight into wilderness area. Thousands of acres of unmanaged forest, with no roads, no trails, and few landmarks. Searching alone would be foolhardy at best, potentially fatal at worst. Protocol demanded I return to my tower and wait for the official search team. The responsible action would be to provide them with all the evidence I'd gathered, then let them conduct a systematic search with proper equipment and personnel. I checked my watch. 10:17. The rescue team wouldn't reach Sawmill for at least another 2 hours. Assuming they cleared the road debris without further delays, then they'd need time to document the scene before beginning any search. Dave's tracks would be at least 6 hours old by then. The trail already showed signs of deterioration from moisture seeping up through the soil. I stared into the forest, where his footprints disappeared among the trees. The unnatural silence pressed against me from all sides. Something had driven Dave to flee into wilderness in the middle of a storm, wearing only one boot. The same something perhaps that had left that crude drawing above his desk. Decision point. Follow procedure, or follow the tracks. I adjusted my pack straps and stepped forward, keeping my eyes fixed on the disturbed earth where Dave's uneven gait had left its record. The forest swallowed me within 20 paces, the tower disappearing behind thick trunks and heavy boughs still dripping from the night's rain. The tracks led deeper into the woods, veering slightly northward, where the terrain grew steeper. Dave's gait had become increasingly erratic, the sock print now dragging in places, the boot print digging deeper at the heel. He'd been running uphill. Stumbling, I followed the trail through a stand of lodgepole pines, where needles and debris provided less clear impressions. Every 30 yards, I stopped to mark my position on the map and check my compass bearing, north-northeast, moving away from both towers into a drainage basin. I'd only observed from above. The forest floor dipped toward a small stream at the bottom of a shallow ravine. Dave's tracks descended the bank at an angle that suggested he'd half slid down the incline. At the water's edge, the footprints stopped. I scanned both banks carefully. The stream ran knee-deep, about 8 feet across, its current strengthened by the previous night's rainfall. The opposite shore showed no sign of emergence, no disturbed mud, no water-filled depressions, nothing to indicate Dave had crossed. I moved downstream 50 yards, then back upstream 100, searching both banks methodically. Nothing. The trail simply vanished at the water's edge, as though Dave had walked into the stream and disappeared. My watch showed 11:32. The search team would reach Sawmill Tower soon. Assuming they'd cleared the access road, I checked my radio. Walker to Forest Service Dispatch. Do you copy? Static hissed for several seconds before a voice broke through. Reading you, Walker. What's your position? Approximately 1.2 miles northeast of Sawmill Tower, following Wilson's tracks. Trail ends at a stream with no continuation on either bank. Request coordinates of search. Team's current position. Stand by. The radio fell silent for nearly a minute. Search team reports road clearing ongoing. Estimated arrival at Sawmill Tower, 1400 hours. I stared at the water, where Dave's tracks disappeared. The professional response would be to secure the scene and wait for the search team. But something about the unnatural silence of the forest, the suddenness of the trail's end pulled at instincts developed over 5 seasons in these mountains. Walker to dispatch. I'm returning to Sawmill Tower to await search team arrival. Copy that. Maintain radio contact. I documented the stream location on my map, took photographs of the final tracks, and marked the spot with surveyor's tape from my pack. The climb back up the ravine followed the same path Dave had taken down. His desperate flight now, a stark narrative written in disturbed earth and broken branches. The afternoon sun had started its westward descent by the time Sawmill Tower came back into view. Shadows stretched longer across the clearing as I approached the structure, its silhouette stark against the deepening blue sky. Something about seeing it from this angle, returning rather than arriving, emphasized its isolation. Inside, the disarray remained exactly as I'd left it. The desk cleared by a single sweep, the broken chair, the coffee stains on the wall. I photographed everything again from new angles, documenting the scene completely before touching anything. At 13:45, I made radio contact with headquarters. Black Ridge to Forest Service Dispatch. Marlene's voice answered immediately, tight with controlled anger. Walker, what the hell are you doing at Sawmill? Investigating Wilson's disappearance. Found evidence of you abandoned your post during fire season. Her words cut through mine. That's grounds for immediate termination. I'd expected this response, understood, but the situation warranted following protocol. Papers shuffled on her end. The rescue team will reach you by morning. They're still clearing deadfall from the access road. Until then, you're to stay exactly where you are. That's a direct order. Copy that. I paused, weighing my next words carefully. Marlene, there's something wrong here beyond Dave just walking off. Her sigh came through clearly. Details. I described the scene at Sawmill Tower. The signs of struggle, the abandoned boot, the tracks leading into wilderness, and their abrupt disappearance at the stream. I left out the drawing, scratched into the wall, and the disturbing logbook entries, concerned they would reinforce the theory that Dave had experienced a psychological break. Could be bear activity, she suggested, or Wilson panicked during the storm, fled, and became disoriented. In one boot, people make irrational decisions under stress. I looked at Dave's desk, where his logbook lay. His entries might provide context. I'll review them before the team arrives. Document everything, but don't disturb potential evidence. Her tone softened slightly. And Tom, the team won't reach you until morning. Secure that tower and stay alert. After signing off, I conducted a thorough inventory of the tower's supplies. The propane tank showed 3/4 full. The water barrel contained approximately 15 gallons. Food stores included standard emergency rations sufficient for 2 weeks. Dave's personal effects remained undisturbed in his footlocker, spare clothing, toiletries, a paperback novel with a bookmark at page 63. The tower's generator had shut down at some point during or after Dave's departure. I checked the fuel level. nearly empty, and refilled it from the reserve tank stored on the ground floor. The engine caught on the third pull, restoring electricity to the tower. With daylight fading, I returned to Dave's logbook. The final entries I'd already seen, but I worked backward through the pages, tracking the deterioration of his mental state through his own documentation. 2 weeks earlier, his entries appeared normal. July 3rd, 8:15, morning conditions clear. Temp 58 degree, wind WSW at 6 MP. No smoke observed in any quadrant. Tourist activity light at Eagle Point Campground. July 4th, 2230. Documented 3 approved campfires at designated sites. Temp holding at 62 with 15% humidity. Fire danger moderates. The change began subtly, almost imperceptibly around July 7th. July 7th, 0312. Movement observed at tree line below western slope. Possible elk or bear. Too dark for positive ID. Note: check for tracks at first light. July 7th, so 645. No tracks found where movement observed. Ground undisturbed. July 8th, 2350. Lights in valley northwest of tower. Too regular for campfire. Too bright for flashlight. Disappeared when observed through binoculars. The entries grew increasingly focused on unexplained observations. July 10th, 1:30. Third consecutive night of tree-line movement. Always same location. Always same time. Nothing visible through nightscope. July 11th, 1420. Time discrepancy noted. Tower clock reads 1420. Wristwatch reads 1505. Both batteries replaced yesterday. July 12th, 2210. Objects on desk rearranged during perimeter check. No wind. Door locked. Second occurrence this week. By midmen, Dave's handwriting had begun to change, becoming tighter and more angular. July 14th. They stand at the edge of the clearing now, only visible from corner of eye. When I turned directly, nothing there. Tried photographing. Camera battery drained immediately. Not natural. July 15th. Temporal anomalies increasing. Watched same hawk catch same mouse 3 times in identical pattern. Tom doesn't notice anything wrong. Maybe they're only showing me. July 16th. The man at the cliff will jump tomorrow. I've seen it already. Tom will see it too. They want us both to see it. It's how they mark us. The final coherent entry read, they're showing me how it ends. I can't let it happen again. I closed the logbook, documenting the progression in my own notes. Dave's deterioration appeared consistent with psychological breakdown, paranoia, delusions, time disorientation, but the specificity troubled me. He'd predicted the cliff jumper event before it happened. The tower grew dimmer as sunset approached. I switched on the desk lamp and continued my investigation, pulling out drawers and checking every compartment. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of weather reports, I found a small leather-bound journal that wasn't part of standard equipment. Inside, Dave had compiled research on local disappearances dating back over 100 years. Names, dates, locations, all meticulously documented and cross-referenced. Some entries included newspaper clippings, others handwritten accounts, apparently transcribed from historical records. He'd mapped them using a Forest Service topographical chart, marking each disappearance with a red X. The pattern was unmistakable. A rough circle approximately 12 miles in diameter, centered on an area labeled Whisper Hollow. I checked my own map. The hollow lay approximately 4 miles northeast of Sawmill Tower, in the direction Dave's tracks had been heading, the same location where I'd observed the bonfire and figures several nights ago. The journal's final pages contained frantically scrolled notes, boundaries thin during electrical storms, doors open at astronomical alignment, time loops observed by multiple witnesses. See Henderson account, 1932. They cannot physically cross, but can pull others through. Same entities observed over 1 to 0 year period. Between pages, I found a yellowed newspaper clipping that had been folded multiple times. The Riverdale Gazette, August 28, 1976. The headline read, "2 Forest Service employees missing after storm." The accompanying photograph showed 2 men in Forest Service uniforms standing beside a lookout tower. The caption identified them as Henry Marsh and Samuel Blackwood. Missing since August 25th. My hand wasn't entirely steady as I held the paper closer to the light. Samuel Blackwood's face, the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, bore an uncanny resemblance to Dave, and Henry Marsh could have been the cliff jumper's brother. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. I moved to the window and saw clouds building on the western horizon, dark and heavy with potential energy. The forecast hadn't mentioned another storm system so soon after the last. I returned to Dave's journal, finding a hand-drawn diagram on the final page. A circle divided into quadrants with symbols I didn't recognize, marking specific points along its circumference. In the center, Dave had written, "The cycle repeats until broken." The tower lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. I checked the generator's fuel gauge. Still nearly full. Another rumble of thunder closer this time. The radio crackled with static. I adjusted the frequency, but the interference only intensified. Darkness fell rapidly as the storm approached. Through the western window, I watched lightning illuminate the cloud formations from within. The tower lights flickered again and went out completely. The generator's hum died mid-cycle, leaving only silence. In the sudden darkness, I reached for my flashlight. Before I could switch it on, a sound came from below. The distinctive creak of weight on the bottom stair, then another, slow, deliberate footsteps ascending toward the tower room. I moved away from the window, positioning myself against the wall beside the door. The footsteps continued their measured pace. 9, 10, 11. I counted 17 stairs in total. The footfall stopped just outside the door. "Dave," I called, receiving no answer. The handle turned slowly, metal scraping against metal in the darkness. As the door began to open, I raised my flashlight like a baton, prepared for whatever might enter. A slash of light cut through the darkness as the door swung open. I stood pressed against the wall, flashlight raised, breath held in my chest. Marlene Haskell stepped over the threshold, water streaming from her Forest Service jacket onto the wooden floor. She didn't see me until I lowered the beam from her face. "Jesus Christ, Walker." She reached for the sidearm at her hip, then relaxed when she recognized me. "Were you planning to beat me with a flashlight?" I lowered my arm. "Thought you weren't coming until morning. Changed my mind." She shook water from her hair and scanned the disordered room. "Power's out. Generator died when the storm hit. Worked fine earlier." Marlene removed her jacket and hung it by the door. Water pulled beneath it on the floorboards. "Roads are a mess. Nearly went off the ridge twice between mile markers 8 and 12. I checked my watch. 9:23. She'd made the drive in terrible conditions alone, after dark. Not standard protocol. "Couldn't wait for the team?" I asked. She pulled a waterproof camera from her bag. "Your call didn't sound like a standard missing person situation." I switched on the battery lantern I'd found in Dave's emergency kit, positioning it on the desk to illuminate the room, the pale light through the wall drawing into sharp relief. Stick figures by a fire, another falling from a cliff. Marlene photographed it immediately, the flash briefly overwhelming the lantern's glow. She worked methodically, documenting the overturned chair, scattered papers, broken mug. "Don't touch anything else," she said. "Evidence team still coming at first light." I stood back while she worked, describing what I'd found at the stream where Dave's tracks disappeared. She listened without comment, her expression revealing nothing as she continued taking photographs. 27 in total. After completing her documentation, she pulled a thin file folder from her bag and placed it on the only clear corner of the desk. "This doesn't leave this room," she said, flipping it open. Inside lay a stack of incident reports spanning from 1976 to 2011. Each detailed the disappearance of Forrest, service personnel in the Black Ridge District. 8 cases total, 16 missing persons. To always go missing at once, I noted, scanning the dates. Always in July or August. Always during or immediately after electrical storms. Marlene nodded. "There's a reason we normally rotate lookouts every 2 seasons in this district, and why we don't station anyone out here alone." I looked up from the reports. "You knew this could happen. We knew there were statistical anomalies." She retrieved a topo map from the file, unfolding it across the desk. Red circles marked the location of each disappearance. No bodies ever recovered, no equipment found, just empty towers and cabins. I pulled Dave's journal from the drawer where I'd found it. Placing it beside Marlene's map, Dave was researching the same pattern. She flipped through the journal, her expression hardening at the increasingly frantic entries. Classic isolation syndrome. We see it in long-term lookouts sometimes. Paranoia, delusions, environmental misinterpretations. That doesn't explain how he predicted the cliff jumper. Or this. I tapped the map where Dave had marked previous disappearances, creating a circle centered on an area labeled Whisper Hollow. Coincidence? Or he accessed old records? She sounded less certain than her words suggested. Thunder cracked directly overhead, rattling the windows in their frames. The storm had intensified while we talked, rain now coming down in sheets that blurred the outside world. "We need to secure this location," Marlene said, collecting the documents. "Bag anything relevant as evidence. We'll conduct a formal search at first light." We worked silently for the next hour, securing the tower against the storm and organizing the evidence. I placed Dave's journal, logbook, and personal notes in separate evidence bags, while Marlene photographed the exterior stairs where I'd found his single boot at 11:42, with wind howling around the tower and rain hammering the roof. The radio on the desk emitted a burst of static. Both of us froze, staring at the device. Another burst. Then a voice emerged through the white noise, distant and broken, but recognizable. "Walker." Dave's voice, barely audible. I grabbed the radio. "Dave, this is Tom. What's your location?" "Over. They're bringing me?" Static swallowed several words. "Hollow at sunrise." Marlene took the radio from my hand. "Wilson, this is Supervisor Haskell. Confirm your position and status." "Only static," answered. She adjusted the frequency, trying 3 different channels with no result. "Could be radio bounce," she said. "Storm interference, reflecting old transmissions." I shook my head. He said, "Hollow at sunrise. That's specific to right now, not some random bounce. Or it's your brain creating patterns and random noise." She set the radio down carefully. "Either way, we stay put until morning. Standard protocol for night operations, especially during electrical storms." I didn't argue. The rational part of me recognized she was right. Venturing out now would be dangerous at best, potentially fatal at worst. But Dave's voice hadn't sounded like someone in immediate danger. There had been an odd flatness to it, like someone reading from a script. We established a watch rotation, one awake, one resting. Marlene took first watch while I tried to sleep on Dave's bunk. The storm continued unabated, lightning flashing through the windows at irregular intervals, followed seconds later by thunder that vibrated through the tower's structure. Sleep proved impossible. At 113, I gave up and joined Marlene at the desk where she was reviewing Dave's logbook. "His documentation deteriorated weeks ago," she observed, not looking up. "Should have been caught in routine supervisory review." "He maintained normal radio procedures until 3 days ago," I said. Nothing in his communications indicated psychological issues. She gave me a sidelong glance. You reported behavioral changes after the cliff jumper incident, not before Marlene closed the logbook. Personnel files show Dave requested transfers 6 weeks ago. Said he wasn't sleeping well, wanted a posting closer to population centers. This was news to me. Why was he kept here? Staffing shortages. His request was approved for end of season. I picked up Dave's journal again, flipping past his research on historical disappearances to the final pages I hadn't fully examined. The frantic writing gave way to more structured notes on something he called the Watchers. The entities exist outside normal time. They observe from the spaces between moments. Multiple witnesses described them as more absence than presence, with features that shift when directly viewed. The next page detailed what Dave believed to be their hunting methodology. They select individuals who observe them back. Lookouts, hikers, anyone who notices the patterns. First contact occurs through temporal anomalies, déjà vu, missing time, objects moving. Second phase involves dream manipulation and waking hallucinations. Final stage culminates during electrical storms, when boundaries between realities thin. Dave's handwriting grew increasingly erratic as the entries continued. They cannot physically cross, but can pull others through. The fire is the doorway. The hollow is their threshold. The final pages contained what appeared to be Fterhand, accounts from previous victims transcribed in Dave's handwriting, but attributed to others. Each described similar experiences, seeing figures at forest edges, time functioning irregularly, feeling watched, culminating in being pulled through during storms. Most disturbing was Dave's conviction that he'd experienced these events before. I've been through this cycle at least 3 times. Details change, but the pattern remains. First, the man jumps from the cliff. Then, the bonfire appears. Then they come for us. Tom sees it differently each time, but I remember fragments from before. We're caught in their loop. Tucked into the back cover, I found a photograph I'd missed earlier. A Polaroid showing 2 people standing beside a bonfire in a forest clearing. I held it under the lantern light and felt my skin tighten. The photo showed Dave and me standing shoulder to shoulder, his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling at the camera. A bonfire blazed beside us, illuminating our faces from below. I had never been to a bonfire with Dave. We had never taken a photo together. I turned the Polaroid over. Written on the back in Dave's handwriting, Tom and Dave, Whisper Hollow, July 23rd, 2023. 5 days from now. Marlene. My voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. Look at this dot. She took the photograph, examining it under the lantern. Where did you get this? Dave's journal. Look at the date. She flipped it over, reading the inscription. Her expression remained neutral, but I noticed her hand tightened slightly on the photo's edge. Easily faked, she said, setting it down. Digital manipulation printed on old Polaroid stock. Why would he fake it? Part of his delusion, creating evidence to support his theories. She slid the photo back into the journal. We've seen this before in isolation cases. Lightning struck somewhere nearby, close enough that the flash and thunder came simultaneously. The tower shuddered beneath us. We need to check that generator again, Marlene said, rising, and secure these windows before they blow in. I helped her fasten the storm shutters, working methodically around the tower's perimeter. Outside, the forest was transformed into a churning mass of shadow and movement, trees bending beneath the wind's force. When we finished, Marlene checked her watch. 3 hours until first light. I'll take watch until 0500, then we'll gear up for the search. We're going to Whisper Hollow, I said. It wasn't a question. She hesitated, then nodded once. We'll follow his tracks from the stream. If there's any chance Wilson's alive, that's our best lead. I returned to Dave's journal, while Marlene monitored the radio. For the next 2 hours, I read everything he'd compiled on the Hollow. Historical accounts from loggers who'd worked the area. In the 1880s, survey reports, noting unusual magnetic anomalies. Local stories about hunters who entered and emerged days later with no memory of lost time. One account from 1932 described a Forest Service ranger who claimed to have lived the same week repeatedly, watching his partner disappear under different circumstances, each time until he finally broke the cycle by taking his own life in the hollow. The ranger's body was discovered at the base of Eagle Cliff, though he'd left a journal describing his suicide by different means at the hollow. Outside, the storm began to ease. Rain fell more steadily now, rather than in violent sheets, and the thunder moved eastward, growing more distant with each passing minute. At 4:37, I began organizing our equipment for the search. Standard protocol required daylight operations, but first light would come by 5:30. We could be underway by 6. I laid out Dave's maps, plotting our route to Whisper Hollow, according to his coordinates. It lay approximately 4 miles northeast of Sawmill Tower, a 2-hour hike under normal conditions, perhaps 3, given the storm damage. We'll need to maintain continuous radio contact with base, Marlene said, checking her equipment. Hourly position reports, documented visual observations only. I nodded, packing the essentials. Water, first aid kit, compass, emergency rations, spare batteries. The photo from Dave's journal sat on the desk beside my pack. Its impossible image, a challenge to everything I thought I understood about reality. The sky had begun to lighten incrementally when the radio crackled again. This time, Dave's voice came through with unnerving clarity. "Tom, they're bringing me back through. Meet at the hollow at sunrise. Come alone." Marlene and I stared at each other across the desk. The transmission hadn't been broken or every word came through perfectly, as though Dave were in the next room. I reached for the radio, but she stopped my hand. "That's not Wilson," she said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because that's not how radios work." She flipped the device over, showing me the battery compartment. Empty. "This hasn't had power since you brought it back from the stream." First light broke in, thin gray bands through the storm shutters. I'd been awake for hours, studying Dave's maps, while Marlene methodically checked and rechecked our gear. The powerless radio sat between us on the desk, its dead batteries a physical contradiction to the clear transmission we'd heard. "Ready?" Marlene secured her pack straps, tightening them across her shoulders. I nodded, folding Dave's map along its creases. The route to Whisper Hollow appeared straightforward, 4 miles northeast. Following a series of old logging paths that converged at the drainage basin, we'd reach it by mid-morning if we maintained steady pace. "Standard search protocol," Marlene said, checking her compass. "Visual sweeps. Documentation of all significant findings. Hourly position reports to headquarters. And if we find Dave," her expression remained neutral, "depends on his condition." We departed Sawmill Tower at 6:12, locking the door behind us. The forest had transformed overnight. Branches ripped from trunks lay scattered across the access. Path and rivulets of rainwater carved channels through the soil. We navigated through debris in silence, Marlene consulting her GPS every few hundred yards. The logging trail appeared on our left after 20 minutes, marked by a weather-worn Forest Service post. According to Dave's map, this path would take us directly to the basin that preceded the hollow. Marlene paused at the junction, frowning at her GPS, signals intermittent. Switching to backup navigation, she pulled out a compass, an orienteering map, confirming our heading before proceeding. The trail narrowed as we continued, transitioning from maintained path to what barely qualified as a game trail. Overhead, the canopy thickened, filtering the morning light into mottled patterns on the forest floor. "This can't be right," Marlene said after 40 minutes. She checked her map again, then examined a topographical feature to our right. "That rock formation should be on our left if we're heading northeast." I consulted Dave's map. The trail might curve to avoid the wetland ahead. We pressed on. The path grew increasingly difficult to follow, sometimes disappearing entirely beneath fallen debris before reappearing yards later. After another half-mile, we reached a distinctive lightning-struck pine. Its trunk split and blackened. I stopped examining the tree. "We've passed this before." "Impossible." Marlene checked her compass. "We've maintained consistent heading. Look at the split pattern. Same tree." She examined it closely, then pulled out her camera and took a photograph. "Marking this location will verify on the return trip." We adjusted course slightly, using the compass rather than following the fading trail. The forest grew denser, underbrush catching at our legs with each step. After 20 minutes, we emerged into a small clearing dominated by a familiar lightning-struck pine. Marlene's expression hardened. "Same tree, different approach angle." I checked my watch. 8:47. We'd been walking for more than 2 hours, and had somehow circled back to the same location twice. "Dave's map shows no topographical features that would force a circle," I said, unfolding his handwritten notes. "But look at this." I pointed to a notation in the margin. "Conventional navigation fails near boundary. Use the trees." "What does that mean?" Marlene asked. "Not sure, but he's marked these symbols at intervals along the route." I indicated small sketches, resembling elongated Ys. Marlene studied them, then scanned ours. "There." She pointed to a young birch with a distinctive fork, its shape matching the first symbol on Dave's map. From certain angles, it formed a perfect Y against the backdrop of darker pines. "He wasn't marking trails," I said. "He was marking sightlines." We positioned ourselves where the birch aligned precisely with the symbol's orientation on the map. From this vantage, another forked tree became visible, approximately 60 yd ahead, corresponding to the second symbol. "He created a visual navigation system," Marlene said, her professional skepticism momentarily replaced by grudging appreciation. We proceeded from marker to marker, following Dave's unconventional breadcrumb trail through terrain that seemed to shift whenever we looked away. At one point, I noticed my watch had advanced from 9:23 to 10:17 in what felt like minutes. "Time check," I said to Marlene. She glanced at her watch. 10:18. "Does that seem right to you?" She hesitated. "I'm more concerned with finding Wilson before the weather turns." The sky had remained clear since dawn, but now clouds gathered along the western horizon, too soon for the forecasted afternoon system. We increased our pace, following 3 more tree markers before reaching a steep ridge that didn't appear on either of our maps. "We need elevation," I said. "Get our bearings." We climbed the unexpected ridge, loose stones sliding beneath our boots. From the top, the forest spread below us in all directions, and there impossibly lay Whisper Hollow, a perfect circle of treeless ground, approximately 200 yards in diameter, visible through a gap in the canopy. The problem was its location, southwest of our position, not northeast, as every map indicated. "That's not possible," Marlene said, checking her compass. The needle swung erratically, settling nowhere. I compared the hollow's appearance to what I'd seen through binoculars from my tower. Same dimensions, same distinctive absence of vegetation, same scorch mark at its center, where the bonfire had burned. "That's it," I confirmed, "but we've been heading away from it for hours." Marlene photographed the hollow from our vantage point, then checked her GPS again. The unit displayed coordinates that placed us miles from our actual position. "Equipment malfunction," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Let's proceed with visual navigation only." We descended toward the hollow, marking our path with broken branches to ensure we could retrace our steps. The air grew noticeably colder as we approached, dropping at least 15 despite the late morning sun. At the boundary where forest met clearing, Marlene stopped. "Temperature differential anomalous." She removed a digital thermometer from her pack, holding it at arm's length into the clearing. 53, 5 cooler than ambient forest temperature. We stepped into the hollow together. The ground felt solid, but somehow different underfoot, neither soft like forest loam, nor hard like packed earth, but something in between that seemed to absorb sound. Our footsteps made no noise as we crossed the barren circle. At the center, a 7-foot diameter patch of ash formed the exact pattern I'd seen days earlier. Marlene photographed it from multiple angles while I searched for signs of Dave. Boot prints, I called, finding distinct impressions along the northern edge. The pattern matched Dave's gait, deeper on the right, where he'd been wearing his remaining boot, lighter on the left, where only a sock covered his foot. Marlene joined me, documenting the tracks. Recent post-rainfall. The prints led to the center of the circle, then disappeared as though Dave had simply vanished mid. I knelt at the circle's center, examining the ash pattern more carefully. What had appeared random from a distance now revealed structure. Lines and angles forming crude stick figures identical to those Dave had scratched into his tower wall. Marlene, look at this. I pointed to the distinct shapes in the ash. No response. I looked up Marlene. The hollow stood empty. I rose quickly, scanning in all directions. Marlene had vanished, despite standing less than 10 feet away moments before. Marlene, I called, my voice strangely muted in the hollow's acoustics. One Joche to where I'd last seen her. Finding her boot prints in the dirt, they proceeded normally for 3 steps, then stopped abruptly, just like Dave's. Marlene Haskell, I shouted at full volume. The sound seemed to die inches from my mouth. I checked my watch. 4:23 in the afternoon. Impossible. We'd arrived at the hollow. Before 11, I'd lost over 5 hours in what felt like minutes. Dropping my pack, I pulled out the radio. Black Ridge 2 dispatched. Emergency situation, over. Only static answered. Black Ridge 2. Any Forest Service personnel. Emergency at Whisper Hollow. 2 personnel missing. Request immediate assistance. The static intensified, occasionally resolving into something that almost resembled words before dissolving again into white noise. The sun hung low on the horizon, now shadows stretching across the hollow from the surrounding trees. I gathered my equipment and headed for the edge of the clearing where we'd entered. Following our marked path, 20 yards of walking brought me back to the ash circle at the center. I tried again, choosing a different direction, focusing on a distinctive lightning-damaged tree at the perimeter. Again, I found myself returning to the center, despite moving in a straight line. The sun dipped lower. Darkness gathered under the trees at the hollow's edge. As shadows lengthened, I noticed movement among them, subtle shifts that disappeared when directly observed. I approached the perimeter, heading toward a section where I'd seen movement. The closer I got, the more the distance seemed to stretch, the edge remaining consistently 30 yards away, despite my continued forward motion. From the trees, something watched. I couldn't see faces or forms, just the negative space their presence created. Areas of deeper darkness that shifted position when I wasn't looking directly at them. The sun vanished abruptly, plunging the hollow into twilight that deepened to darkness within minutes. I switched on my flashlight, its beam creating a small circle of visibility that seemed to compress the darkness around it rather than dispel it. The watching presences drew closer, maintaining a constant distance just beyond my light's reach. Not approaching, not retreating, waiting. I returned to the center and emptied my pack, assessing resources. To protein bars, 32 ounces of water, emergency blanket, first aid kit, headlamp, spare batteries, fire starter kit, Dave's journal, and maps that no longer matched the territory. Night fell completely. The temperature dropped another 10. Without the sun, my only reference points disappeared, leaving me alone in a perfect circle of darkness, with no way out and unknown figures watching from its edges. I gathered fallen branches from the hollow's edge, never venturing more than 15 feet from the ash circle. Each trip to the perimeter revealed the same phenomenon. shadowy figures retreating just as I approached, maintaining constant distance like deer aware of a hunter. The branches felt unnaturally dry despite the recent storm, their surfaces papery against my palms. My training took over: build shelter, establish warmth, conserve resources. I arranged the branches in a pyramid over the ash circle, using Dave's journal pages as tinder. The fire starter kit contained waterproof matches and petroleum-soaked cotton, reliable even in damp conditions. The first match caught immediately, flames climbing the paper and licking at the smaller twigs. The fire created a bubble of light extending roughly 12 feet in all directions. Beyond that boundary, darkness pressed inward with unusual density. I fed branches into the flames, methodically calculating burn rates against my limited supply. 2 hours of sustained fire, maybe 3 if I rationed carefully. My watch read 7:35, though the true time remained suspect. Full darkness had fallen less than an hour after Marlene's disappearance. Either night had come hours early, or my perception of time had become untethered from reality. I ate half a protein bar and sipped water, watching the boundary where firelight met darkness. The shadowy figures had organized themselves equidistantly around the perimeter, roughly 8 of them spaced like points on a compass. When I focused directly on any single position, I saw nothing, just deeper pockets of darkness. But in my peripheral vision, they took on vague human shapes, standing motionless. The temperature continued dropping. I unfolded the emergency blanket, wrapping it around my shoulders, where it crinkled with each movement. The metallic surface reflected firelight, creating disorienting patterns at the edge of my vision. "Marlene," I called periodically, my voice dying in the hollow's strange acoustics. "Dave." No response came except the fire's steady crackle. I maintained the flames, adding branches at precisely timed intervals to ensure consistent heat and light. The shadowy figures never approached the fire's boundary, but neither did they retreat, waiting, watching. My watch showed 11:47 when I noticed the first anomaly. The fire maintained steady height, despite no fuel addition, for 20 minutes. The branches burned without diminishing, flames holding it approximately 3 feet high. I touched a stick to the fire's edge, feeling it catch and burn at normal speed, yet the existing branches remained unconsumed. At midnight exactly, the flames surged upward to twice their previous height. No wind triggered the change, no fresh fuel introduced. The fire simply expanded, stretching toward the night sky in a perfect column. Heat intensified against my face, forcing me back several steps. Movement at the perimeter caught my attention. Someone stood at the edge of the firelight 30 feet away, a human silhouette not blending with the darkness like the other watchers. "Dave," I called, rising to my feet. The figure stepped forward, features resolving in the firelight. Dave Wilson looked barely recognizable. His Forest Service uniform hung in tatters from a frame grown gaunt over days rather than hours. Hollow eyes reflected the flames, set deep in a face that had acquired new lines and angles. He stood just beyond the fire's reach, bare feet planted on the hollow's dirt. "Dave." I moved toward him, boots crunching against the ash. "You shouldn't have come." His voice carried flatly across the distance, devoid of its usual cadence. "Now you're part of it too." I continued forward, closing the gap between us. "What happened to you? Where's Marlene?" 10 feet from Dave, the ground between us rippled, not metaphorically. The actual soil undulated like water, disturbed by a stone, sending concentric circles outward from a central point. I stopped, boots sinking slightly into suddenly unstable earth. Dave watched the phenomenon without surprise. They exist outside normal time. He spoke mechanically, as though reciting memorized text. "The forest is their hunting ground. Has been for centuries." "Who are they?" I gestured toward, the shadowy figures maintaining their position around the perimeter. "The Watchers. They feed on fear and confusion. They pull people halfway into their world. I tested the ground with one foot, finding it had solidified again. Dave, we need to get out of here. Head back to the towers. He laughed, a hollow sound that held no humor. I've been trying to leave for years. You've been missing less than 2 days. Dave shook his head. Time works differently here. I've been caught in their loop for what feels like years, living the same events over and over, with small variations. The time loop you wrote about in your journal. His eyes registered brief surprise. You found it at your tower. I took another cautious step forward. Dave, whatever's happening, we can figure it out together. It never changes, he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Sometimes you see the jumper. Sometimes I do. Sometimes we both disappear. They're testing outcomes, playing with possibilities. The fire behind me pulsed higher, casting Dave's face in stark relief. Deep shadows pulled beneath his cheekbones and around his eyes, making him appear skull-like. We're leaving, I said firmly. Both of us, right now. Dave shook his head again. There's only one way to break the cycle. His hand emerged from behind his back, gripping a familiar 18 hunting knife with worn leather handle and brass guard. My knife. The one I'd left locked in the drawer at my tower. Where did you get that? I asked, stopping my advance. You always keep it in the same place. Dave's voice flattened further through every iteration. The shadowy figures at the perimeter edged closer, their forms becoming more distinct as they approached the firelight's boundary. Still not fully visible, but more present somehow. One of us has to die here, Dave said, adjusting his grip on the knife, or we both remain trapped forever. I raised both hands, palms outward. Dave, that's not you talking. Something's influencing your thoughts. This is the only truth I found. His eyes reflected only firelight, pupils reduced to pinpoints. After dozens of cycles, hundreds of variations, death is the only exit. The watching figures drew closer still, a slow, coordinated constriction of their circle. The temperature dropped several more degrees, my breath forming visible clouds between us. Dave lunged with unexpected speed and strength, covering the distance between us in a single movement. The knife slashed toward my midsection as I pivoted sideways, feeling the blade's passage inches from my jacket. I grabbed his wrist with both hands, using his momentum to direct him past me. It's me or you, he snarled, voice no longer his own, deeper, layered with something that echoed. Someone has to feed the hollow. Dave twisted in my grip, stronger than his emaciated frame suggested. The knife came around again, slicing through my jacket sleeve, but missing flesh. I maintained my hold on his wrist, trying to force the knife downward while keeping my balance on the uneven ground. We struggled beside the fire, its heat scorching against my back. Dave's free hand clawed at my face, fingernails raking across my cheek. I felt warm blood trickle down to my jaw. The metallic emergency blanket slipped from my shoulders, one corner landing in the fire, where it immediately began to melt rather than burn. Dave, stop, I shouted, still trying not to harm him. This isn't you. His only response was a renewed assault, driving me backward, toward the fire. I felt intense heat against my legs, fabric beginning to smoke. In desperation, I hooked my foot behind his ankle and pushed forward, toppling us both away from the flames. We landed hard, Dave beneath me, the knife pinned between our bodies. For 1 second, I glimpsed recognition in his eyes, fear, confusion, awareness, before it vanished behind the empty stare. Tom, he whispered, his own voice briefly returning. They're inside me. The knife twisted between us. I felt a sharp pain in my side, warm wetness spreading across my ribs. Not deep, but enough to weaken my grip. Dave leveraged the advantage, rolling sideways to pin my arm beneath his body. During the movement, his sleeve brushed against the fire's edge. Fabric ignited instantly, flames racing up his arm with unnatural speed. Dave made no attempt to extinguish them, instead laughing, a sound that started human, but degenerated into something else entirely. "This isn't how it ends," he screamed as flames engulfed his torso, consuming clothing and flesh with impossible veracity. The watching figures converged, crossing the boundary they'd maintained throughout the night. Their forms solidified as they approached, humanoid shapes composed of deeper darkness, moving with fluid grace across the hollow. Dave burned like a torch beside me, still gripping the knife, still trying to strike, despite the flames consuming him. The hollow's ash circle beneath us began to shift and swirl, forming patterns identical to those in Dave's journal. In a final desperate act, I tackled the burning figure that had been Dave Wilson, driving us both toward the hollow center, where the ash pattern swirled most intensely. Heat seared my hands and face as I pushed forward, ignoring the pain spreading across my side from the knife wound. The ground beneath us changed texture, becoming something neither solid nor liquid. We sank into it together, the burning figure that had been my friend still struggling against my grip. The last thing I saw was the circle of watchers forming a perfect ring around the fire, their featureless faces turned downward as the hollow's center swallowed us completely. Then absolute darkness. Light penetrated my eyelids and painful pulses. Antiseptic smell, mechanical beeping at regular intervals. Something rigid around my torso restricted each breath to shallow sips of air. I opened my eyes to institutional ceiling tiles, off-white, pitted with tiny holes in perfect rows. Hospital. The realization came with detached certainty. "He's responsive," a female voice said from somewhere to my right. A face appeared above me. Middle-aged woman, dark hair pulled tight beneath a surgical cap, crow's feet around steady eyes. She held a penlight that tracked left to right across my vision. "Mr. Walker, can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but produced only a rasp. My throat felt scoured with sandpaper. Someone pressed the plastic cup against my lips, and I sipped lukewarm water that tasted impossibly sweet. "You're at Riverside Regional," the doctor said. "I'm Dr. Lieberman. You've been unconscious for 3 days. 3 days." The information floated, disconnected from meaning. How did I? My voice cracked, triggering a coughing fit that sent lances of pain through my rib cage. "Search team found you Tuesday morning at the base of Eagle Cliff," she continued. "Severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, moderate dehydration. Eagle Cliff, the jumper, Dave." Fragments of memory collided without cohesion. I remembered fire, darkness, figures watching from the trees, but nothing about returning to Eagle Cliff. "What day is it?" I asked. "Friday, July 23rd. The date snagged something in my memory. Important. I couldn't place why. "Your supervisor is waiting outside," Dr. Lieberman said. "Short visit only. You need rest." She adjusted something on the IV drip beside my bed and left. Minutes later, Marlene Haskell entered, wearing her Forest Service uniform, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but the tightness around her eyes betrayed concerned Walker. She nodded, taking the chair beside my bed. "Good to see you conscious." "What happened?" I asked, hoping you could tell me. She placed a leather portfolio on her lap. "You missed 3 scheduled radio check-ins. When you didn't respond to emergency channels, we deployed search teams to both towers." "Both towers," I repeated. "You were with me at Whisper Hollow." Her forehead creased slightly. "No, I wasn't. I coordinated the search from district headquarters." The certainty in her voice didn't match my fragmented memories. I recalled her photographing Dave's tower, examining his logbook, walking beside me as we followed his unconventional tree markers. "You disappeared," I insisted. "In the hollow, the ground just Walker." She cut me off firmly. "I've been at headquarters since Wednesday morning. We never went to any hollow together." The confidence in her denial felt absolute. Either my memories were false or something had altered hers. "Dave," I said, "did you find him?" Marlene's posture stiffened. Wilson remains unaccounted for. We're classifying it as abandonment of post-pending investigation. He didn't abandon anything. He was with me in the hollow when Tom, the use of my first name, stopped me. The official incident report cites equipment failure and hazardous weather conditions as contributing factors. You experienced a traumatic head injury after leaving your assigned post without proper authorization. I noticed the careful language, the bureaucratic framing. The report had already been written, the narrative established. There are no unauthorized structures or clearings matching your hollow description within the search grid, she continued. The GPS data from your equipment shows erratic movement through unmapped terrain before your signal disappeared completely. And how did I end up at Eagle Cliff? Unknown. You were found approximately 40 yards from the cliff base with no equipment except your uniform and boots. She opened her portfolio and withdrew a form. You're being placed on medical leave for the remainder of the season, full pay, and benefits conditional on completing a psychological evaluation before reinstatement. The others who disappeared, I said the pattern Dave found. It's real, Marlene. Something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or fear quickly suppressed. Focus on recovery, Walker. She placed the form on my bedside table. We'll process all the paperwork. Nothing for you to worry about. She stood to leave, pausing at the door. Your personal effects from the tower will be shipped to your home address. Standard procedure for mid-season departure. After she left, I pressed the morphine button twice, letting medicated darkness pull me under. They discharged me 6 days later with a prescription for pain management and contact information for 3 different therapists, specializing in trauma recovery. My rib cage remained, wrapped in elastic bandages and headaches, pulsed behind my eyes whenever light grew too intense. My sister Rachel drove me to her place in Clearwater, 80 meters from the nearest Forest Service boundary. She had prepared the spare bedroom with fresh sheets and blackout curtains. Placing a picture of water and medication on the nightstand, Marlene called me. She explained when I asked how she knew I was injured, said, "You had an accident on the job." For 2 weeks, I slept 14 hours a day, waking only to eat whatever Rachel placed before me and shuffle to the bathroom. The concussion symptoms receded gradually. First the nausea, then the sensitivity to light. Finally, the crushing headaches that had made coherent thought impossible. As physical healing progressed, my memories crystallized, not just fragments of what had happened in Whisper Hollow, but impossible recollections of events I couldn't have experienced. I remembered watching Dave stand at the tower window, scanning Eagle Cliff through binoculars. I remembered being the one who jumped, feeling weightless as the ground rushed toward me. I remembered finding my own boot abandoned in the forest, my own logbook filled with increasingly frantic entries. Dave had called them loops, time cycles experienced with variations. I dismissed it as paranoia or isolation-induced psychosis, but now similar memories occupied my mind with the texture and detail of lived experience. By week 3, I could remain awake for 6-hour stretches. Rachel had converted her dining table into a makeshift workspace where I began researching historical disappearances in the Black Ridge district. I ordered records through interlibrary loan, compiled dates and locations, and created a map using thumbtacks and colored thread on a corkboard. The pattern emerged exactly as Dave had documented. 16 Forest Service employees had vanished in pairs over 47 years, always during July or August, always during or after electrical storms, always within the 12 meters diameter circle centered on Whisper Hollow. I expanded my research to include regional folklore, historical accounts from early settlers, and newspaper archives dating to 1872. The terminology varied. The watching people, forest ghosts, the boundary walkers, but descriptions remained consistent across centuries. Rachel worried. I overheard her phone conversations with my doctor. Phrases like obsessive behavior, and possible post-traumatic delusion filtering through the thin walls. I couldn't explain to her what I barely understood myself, that something had fundamentally altered during that night in Whisper Hollow, changing how I experienced time and memory. 6 weeks after my rescue, an unmarked envelope arrived, addressed in unfamiliar handwriting, no return address, postmarked from 3 states away. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph showing me standing beside a bonfire. The date scrolled at the bottom read July 23rd, 2023, the day I'd woken in the hospital. Dave should have been standing beside me in the image. The space where he would have been showed only a burn mark, as though someone had held a flame to that portion of the photograph until it blackened and melted. I turned the Polaroid over. Written in Dave's distinctive block letters were 7 words. "You broke the cycle. Don't come back." The handwriting matched his logbook entries perfectly. I never returned to Black Ridge Tower. When my medical leave ended, one requested transfer to the Forest Service Archives Division in Denver, documenting historical incidents throughout the national park system. My supervisor attributed the career change to trauma response. I didn't correct her assumption. My research continued quietly, officially focused on historical record preservation, while privately mapping patterns of disappearances across the western states. I found 9 locations with similar characteristics to Whisper Hollow, places where conventional navigation failed, where time behaved inconsistently, where people vanished in pairs during storms. Sometimes, on stormy nights, my radio would pick up transmissions, consisting mostly of static, punctuated by what sounded like Dave's laughter. I recorded each occurrence, noting date, time, and weather conditions. The pattern suggested correlation with astronomical alignments and electrical storm intensity. I keep the Polaroid in my wallet behind my driver's license. When people ask about the burn mark, I tell them it was a developing error. The lie comes easily now, part of a larger pattern of careful omissions that define my post-Black Ridge life. Some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. Some patterns are better left unrecognized. In certain remote places, those who watch the forest are themselves being watched. This knowledge sits in my chest alongside healed ribs that ache before storms, a constant reminder that I experienced something beyond the Forest Service incident reports. Sterile language. Dave saved me by choosing to remain behind. Sometimes I wonder if he's still there, caught in another cycle, watching another version of me through binoculars as I scan the forest for smoke signals and anomalies. I don't hike anymore. I avoid forests after dark, and every July 23rd, I burn a small fire in my backyard metal pit and watch the flames until dawn, making sure nothing emerges from their dancing light except shadows that behave according to the laws of physics. Nothing ever has. But I keep watching anyway.